enterprises and statutory bodies, Mr. Wade George, Executive Chairman, EY, Mr. Ronald Ramkissoon, one of the presenters this afternoon, past presidents of the TTMA, Board of Directors of the TTMA, captains of industry, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Long salutation listing, so those who follow me don't necessarily have to follow suit, right? Good morning, good afternoon to all. I'm delighted to welcome each and every one of you here this afternoon to the TTMA's post-budget engagement. TTMA is very appreciative of you choosing us to be your preferred option for this engagement. We know you had a choice, and so we are very grateful for your support. Also, those who are not joining us physically and are joining us online, we appreciate your presence. Thank you as well for being part of these proceedings. From the onset, I wish to thank the Minister of Finance for agreeing to be our honored and featured guest. To our expert panelists, Mr. Wade George and Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, thank you for taking time to be with us, and we do look forward for your insightful pronouncements on the budget. And of course, our President, Mr. Roach, who will be moderating proceedings for us this evening. Thank you, sir, for your facilitating this process. And of course, our sponsors, First Citizen, EY, Exem, and Answer McCall Group of Companies. Without you, today's event would not have been possible, and dare I say successful. We all heard the budget presentation yesterday, and some of us were more captivated than others. There were lots of pronouncements that would have an impact on non-energy manufacturing sector in the country. And so we look forward this afternoon to the Minister further elaborating on some of the holistic measures he outlined in the budget that would impact our sector. The presenters of the panel will bring their expert positions on matters from a macroeconomic standpoint, and our president, as I said, would present some deliverables on the budget that impact on the business community specifically. You, our live and listening audience, will have the opportunity as well to partake in the event as well. Please, after the presentation, if you wish, you can send question to WhatsApp 3236616. Let me repeat that, 3236616. Or you can join the queues that we will have at mics strategically placed in and around, where your questions will be presented and the moderator will take those questions and present it to the panel. With that being said, my task now is to introduce our first speaker and presenter. Just give me 1 sec. Our first presenter, Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, studied economics at the University of the West Indies, from which he gained a BSc, MSc, and a PhD degree. Before joining Republic Bank in 1992, he was employed at the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago for 12 years as an economist. Ronald has written and published on several subject matters, mainly in monetary and trade matters, and is a frequent commentator on economic issues. Until November 2013, he was at Republic Bank as a senior economist and manager of its economic intelligence unit. He was also the editor of the bank's quarterly publication, Republic Economic Newsletter. He is a former member of several boards and presently chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Fair Trading Commission and a 2014 distinguished alumni of the University of the West Indies Alumni Association. Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon.
A pleasant good afternoon to everyone, especially the Minister of Finance, who has us here today, and fellow ministers. I want to thank the TTMA for inviting me to share some thoughts with you, members of the TTMA, members of the media. My first intervention this afternoon is with some remarks. Indeed, I am humbled by the invitation, I should say, given the strength of the panel that I've been asked to join this evening, this afternoon. The budget was presented yesterday. Approximately 30% of the GDP of this country. That is important because it indicates the extent or the reach of government in terms of this economy. And as such, whatever the government does or does not do influences the lives and livelihood of business, workers, everyone, really. I want to take the opportunity in my opening remarks to remind us that the budget, those initiatives, and in particular, the revenues, expenditures, and the outcome in terms of a deficit, that it is located in the context of a medium-term policy framework. It is located, which itself is located in Vision 2030, spanning 2016 to 2030. We have been through the first 3 years. We are into the second 3 years, 21 to 25, I think it is, Minister. And we are told in the PSIP, which I recommend that everyone reads because it gives you a flavor for a more general development thrust and what the government says it is about, a broader context, a longer-term framework. It is my feeling that the focus on the oil price, revenue went up, expenditure went down, the way these figures move in a particular year, it is only part of the story. And I think we will be missing a great part of it if we do not look at least the 3-year period in which the budget is located. In fact, I suggest that it would be very useful for, just as the Minister of Finance makes a presentation on the finances, that we have as well as a country greater conversation about the medium-term plan. What are the plans? And do they need revising? Should we revise Vision 2020, the NDS, the National Development Strategy? Should we not? And what about the roadmap recovery report and the community roadmap report? I think that they are all very important documents, and really I would like to see them on the government's website. I think we need to read what is there, and we need to discuss and debate if we are going to evolve what is best for Trinidad and Tobago. Final comment. There are many positive initiatives advertised, announced in the budget by the Minister of Finance. But there's one line that I have remembered from my university days, that while in this economy, like many other economies, you have incentives to invest, to do things, to behave in particular ways, there are also disincentives at work in every economy. and that very often the good intentions which lie behind the incentives are very much offset by the negative or the disincentives that exist. So any government can end up spending a lot of money, giving good incentives for business, for man on the street, etc. But there are certain disincentives in operation that offset the good incentives. Indeed, I would appeal specifically to the manufacturing sector here today to see whether or not, rather than asking for incentives, you cannot make the case for the removal of disincentives, such that the government may not have to put out any money. And at this time, given what is happening to energy revenues, that would be a good thing. But instead, remove the disincentives that exist, and the returns might very well be much more positive than we might think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ronald, for those words. Touch on incentives and disincentives. The business community, the manufacturing community continue to be some of the best leading manufacturers in the country, in the region, and in this hemisphere. So I have no doubt once the enabling environment is created, either through incentive or disincentives and removing obstacles, we will continue to strive and be the leaders of industry in the entire Western Hemisphere. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Wade George. He's the executive chairman of EY. He's a professional in all capacity. He has been working with EY for quite a number of years. He's an attorney at law with a Master's of Law degree from the University of London, Queen's Mary, and Westfield College, and a BA Law and Sociology degree from the University of Kent at Canterbury. Wade has, as I said, over 30 years experience with tax systems and working with tax administrators and governments on tax policy. He has worked in Trinidad, Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, and Jamaica, to name a few countries. During his career, Wade has worked in EY Barbados, New York, Trinidad locations, and has experience in a broad range of business advisory roles, touching on multiple industries. He's a former tax manager, partner of Ernst & Young Caribbean, and former member of EY's Advisory Council to the Americas, CEO in New York. I introduce to you Mr. Wade George. Wade?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I've been asked to deliver some brief remarks and to maybe try to unpack the Minister of Finance's 4-hour budget presentation in a short period of time. So first, I should say I have, among his other attributes, I have a newfound respect for the Minister's stamina. So how do we approach this? Well, first of all, I think it's important perhaps to use the opportunity of a national budget for a time of reflection on the long-term frame. And I think the Minister articulated it well. Over the last 10 years, we have certainly experienced some diminution in some of our key economic metrics. Real GDP, our forex reserves. But what's the frame for that? The frame for that has been the decline in oil and gas production, which is well known. In between, we've been buffeted by volatile energy prices, which are way beyond our control. And at the same time, we have received the windfall in 2022. So negotiating that environment would come with a tremendous amount of responsibility and acute decision-making. It's important to understand that notwithstanding that, Trinidad and Tobago has some very commendable macroeconomic attributes, and the minister articulated that well. When I move around the Caribbean and speak to both leaders and business persons, they find our economic buffers enviable. And there are many aspects of our fiscal affairs that they would only wish to emulate, whether that be GDP per capita, debt to GDP ratios, obviously our Heritage and Stabilization Fund, and many other factors and facets of what Trinidad and Tobago represents. In fact, while we have our challenges, we must understand that many countries in our region have great challenges as well. Let me give you an example of Barbados. Barbados is faced with global minimum tax, which is targeted to make offshore jurisdictions less favorable. Let's look at our Eastern Caribbean partners, where the CBI program, Citizen by Investment, is under continuous attack. So while we do have our issues, we can manage them better over time. So when looking at that frame, I do believe that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And what I mean by that is, obviously and importantly, we need to take care of our main revenue line, which is our energy sector. And the importance here is to increase production volumes over time. This involves difficult choices, which would be a way-off between incentivizing increased production, but at the same time maintaining fiscal balances, even in the short term. And the minister has lived that in many periods. And therefore, some of these decisions are very difficult and have to be made in a more long-term frame. The other issue is we must stabilize our revenue base at the moment. And therefore, there is good reason why we should implement matters such as the property tax, which has been in design for many years, the institutional strengthening of the TTRA, and the enactment of transfer pricing legislation. It's important that we do these things collectively because the stability of our domestic and other economic base is important. And of course, transfer pricing also helps. It's familiar to multinationals. It's something that they would encounter across the spectrum of the globe, and therefore they would be no stranger to it. Turning to the issue of FX, I'm seeing this in the news quite recently. The government has made a very clear policy choice, which is well-intentioned, and it is to protect against inflation and to protect the most vulnerable in society. But we must recognize that there are trade-offs. So we have read recently about access for SMEs, and we also have to understand that in the context of repatriation, you're up against market dynamics, such as the short-term yield on US dollars is higher than our own, and there would be a reluctance or concern on the part of persons to convert US into TT if they are not sure that they can get this vital resource when they need it. Nevertheless, it's very heartening to know that the minister is engaged in this, and collectively we can find the best possible solution, notwithstanding the challenges. In terms of the stimulation of investment, the one area that I would really like to call out, and this is being sponsored by the Honourable Minister of Trade and Industry, is the special economic zones. This legislation, which will replace and repeal the Free Zones Act, is going to incentivize both domestic and international investment in Trinidad and Tobago in an internationally compliant way. And in doing so, if we look across the border in Jamaica, it has been able to create tens of thousands of jobs using this regime. The other benefit of the implementation of this regime is to remove Trinidad and Tobago off of the OECD's uncooperative tax list. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this, but this listing means that Trinidad and Tobago remains the subject of many repercussions from our European trading partners. For example, we faced the revocation of our treaty with Norway and Denmark. We have faced countervailing defensive measures in many other European territories, including the imposition of withholding tax on vital payments, the non-deductibility of expenses. So this is a very important area for multiple reasons that we get done as soon as possible. I think in saying all of this, the issues in front of us are not just government issues. Clearly, the private sector has to play a role. And we have to put less emphasis on the government to lead investment. And we have to take our own responsibility for generating foreign exchange, given the incentive platform that the minister has devised over the period. A good example that I can give from our own institution is we recognize the tightness of the labor market in the United States, and we launched and stood up a 70-person executive assistance program where we hired executive assistants in Trinidad and Tobago who now work remotely and provide that service to our US network offices. Now, for me and you who are accustomed to having your secretary next door, this may be a quantum leap. But in fact, this was going on for many, many years in the US, and it was maybe the difference between Atlanta and New York. Trinidad and Tobago is a fine destination. The availability of labor is here, and there were cost savings derived. And we expect that offering to grow and expand and generate commensurate foreign exchange. So there are opportunities out there, and we've seen them in ecotourism, we've seen them in the steel pan initiatives, we've seen them in the export of our energy services in new basins like Guyana and Suriname. And there's so many more opportunities that we must look into. Before closing, I would say this, and I want to quote Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, which is the largest asset management firm in the world. He said over the weekend, and I quote, that over his career, he has never seen an atmosphere where the business environment has ingrained in it more fear. And what is important is optimism and hope, because fear is a self-professing philosophy, and therefore we can spiral ourselves into a situation where we don't see the opportunities for what they are and provide a bit more negativity than is necessary. And to lead through this, I think the bright spirit, the entrepreneurship of the Trinidad and Tobago business community is extremely important. So, in conclusion, we will find our way through this. We are in a far better position than most of our Caribbean peers, and it's important that we work together for a brighter future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wade. Stabilizing the macroeconomic fundamentals of a country sounds like a lot. And we must give the government of Trinidad and Tobago kudos for doing that, because as was pronounced in the budget, most of the macro fundamentals in Trinidad and Tobago are going in the right direction. The minister pointed out unemployment rates, inflation, stabilized foreign exchange rates. So we are doing well, so kudos to the government for that. But George also spoke about stabilizing the income stream of the government, the revenue stream. And again, the government must be given kudos for doing that without placing additional burdens and taxations on those kind of things on the government. One way to look at that as well is that we need to get those people who are not tax compliant into the net. And we are hopeful and optimistic the Revenue Authority will do such things and bring revenues to the government without placing additional burdens on the already compliant with regards to taxation. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce my president, your president, Mr. Roger Roach, to the podium. Roger is the president of the TTMA and is founder and chief executive officer of Lazuri Apparel Limited, the leading manufacturer and exporter of commercial and industrial workwear in Trinidad and Tobago. And he didn't ask me to say that. It's factual, right? Mr. Roach is passionate about the holistic development of the manufacturing sector in Trinidad and Tobago, and I will venture to say the wider Caribbean as well. He has been leading the charge in taking missions outside of Trinidad and Tobago to secure market opportunities for manufacturers in Trinidad and Tobago, but also pronouncing on bilateral trading relationship between our member states of CARICOM, among our member states of CARICOM. He was re-elected to the TTMA Board of Directors in April of this year and currently holds the office of the President of the TTMA. He's the chairman of Export Centers Company Limited, ECCL, and serves as a director on the board of Evolving Technologies and Enterprise Development Company Limited, ETEC, and Vanguard Hotel Limited. Mr. Roger Roach.
The Honourable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance, Senator the Honourable Paula Gopi-Schoon, Minister of Trade and Industry, and we like to call her a champion of business, someone we work very closely with at the TTMA. The Honourable Camille Robinson-Regis, Minister of Housing and Urban Development. And let me pause, because someone asked me why we have 8 government ministers at our post-budget forum. But all of these ministers at the TTMA, we work very closely with them. And as Minister of Housing and Urban Development, we have many members who are manufacturers and manufacturers of inputs into construction. And so we thought it very fitting that we invite the Honourable Minister here today. The Honourable Nayan Gatsby Dolly, Minister of Education, and this minister has responsible for MIC. And we work very closely with MIC in the development of our manufacturing apprenticeship program. The Honourable Marvin Gonzalez, Minister of Public Utilities. And, the Minister and I are in deep discussions about the pending bottle bill, as well as utilities is one of our competitive advantages that we have here in the sector in Trinidad and Tobago. The Honourable Senator the Honourable Donna Cox, Minister of Social Development and Family Services, and as business people, we are cognizant of the fact that we need a viable social safety net to protect the most vulnerable in Trinidad and Tobago. The Honourable Brian Manning, my good friend, who operationalizes a lot of the programs of the Ministry of Finance. Senator the Honourable Renuka Sagram Singh Suklal, Minister in the Office of the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. And we work very closely with this ministry, and this ministry is very important to the ease of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago. P.S. Randall Karim in the Ministry of Trade and Industry, members of the Diplomatic Corps, chairmen and members of the Board of State Enterprises and statutory bodies, panelists, Mr. Wade George, Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, past presidents in the audience, past directors of the board and present directors of the board, captains of industry, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to address you this afternoon at the TTMA's post-budget discussion. This is the first iteration of this event, and we are here to discuss the budget for the financial year 2023-2024. This forum provides all of us with a unique opportunity to engage directly with the Minister of Finance and get clarity on some of the measures outlined in the national budget. We want to thank you, Honourable Minister, for making yourself available once again for this event. Let's give the Minister a round of applause, please. I already acknowledge the presence of other government ministers who we collaborate closely with, and it is important that collaborating with the private sector in crafting and implementing policies that will diversify the economy, develop a skilled and productive workforce, look after the most vulnerable, and create a safe and secure society. An economy cannot grow, develop, and prosper without strong collaboration between the public sector and the private sector, especially an industrialized nation like Trinidad and Tobago. As president of the TTMA, I have the distinct honor and privilege to represent the non-oil manufacturing sector in Trinidad and Tobago, a key pillar in the thrust for growth and diversification of our economy. For us, this is not empty rhetoric. We live, plan, work, and invest in this every day. In a world that continues to evolve at an astonishing pace, our manufacturing sector remains the catalyst for sustainable development. It is an engine that drives innovation, generates employment, and fuels economic growth. As manufacturers invest in their operations and seek to increase exports, earn viable foreign exchange. It is the TTMA's privilege and responsibility to advocate for the interests of this vital sector, which continues to play a fundamental and pivotal role in our country's advancement. Ladies and gentlemen, the association is pleased with the pronouncement that the growth in the country's GDP is now being driven mainly by the non-energy sector. In the interest of time, permit me to turn directly to some of the proposed fiscal and other measures outlined in the national budget. The first one is an increase in the minimum wage by 17% or $3 per hour from $17.50 to $20.50 per hour. The TTMA has no objection, and I want to repeat, the TTMA has no objection to this increase in the minimum wage. In fact, we did a survey amongst our members and we found that a lot of our members are already paying workers above the minimum wage, and the minister's figure is actually quite in line with the results of our survey. 2, the business levy exemption for manufacturing companies whose gross receipts fall in the 30% tax bracket. We welcome this initiative, and it is an added program that will support the other programs, such as the Export Booster Initiative, which is outlined by the Ministry of Trade and Industry. However, it's important to note that this initiative will impact businesses who are already making above $1 million in profits. The introduction of a cybersecurity tax allowance of up to $500,000. This is a timely and welcome initiative to encourage investment in cybersecurity, as we have seen where digital attacks have been mounted against both private and public organizations in the recent past by hackers. The introduction of a 150% tax allowance on corporate sponsorship to public and private schools registered with the Ministry of Education. And on this initiative, I want to encourage businesses to go to a traditional mechanism by adopting a school in your area and providing critical support to those schools that fall within your community. And I would like the Minister just to clarify if this also applies to tertiary and vocational training institutions. We support the building of additional industrial parks in various areas such as Central and along the East-West corridor. Industrial parks, if it's pointed in the right direction, is a key pillar in the thrust for diversification of the economy. It has worked in many large economies where you cluster businesses into parks and you ensure that the businesses that are allocated to those parks support high-performing long-term growth industries. The pronouncement on all measures to improve the ease of doing business is welcomed by our association. Digitalization or digitization of payments of additional government offices and additional scanners at the port are all welcomed by the business community. And to talk about the scanners at the port, this is a long overdue initiative, and we must find a way as a country to confront the national security issues while at the same time not hampering trade. Further, the highly anticipated implementation of the Revenue Authority should assist with the ease of doing business framework in Trinidad and Tobago. Far too often, the lack of resources at Customs and BIR, there are inefficiencies, they are causing inefficiencies and delays, which translate into increasing costs for business operators. We hope that the Revenue Authority will be implemented swiftly and that it will address the smooth transitioning to this new framework, which will address some of the shortcomings to the predecessor entities. We are very pleased, in particular, with the government thrust in terms of youth development via vocational initiatives, which, when fully implemented and expanded, will provide the productive sector with a much-needed skilled workforce to encourage investment and economic growth. Additionally, we want to mention that Trinidad and Tobago has traditionally placed a lot of emphasis on academic pursuits, and there are significant gaps in terms of skills and skills training and providing a skilled workforce to the productive sector. And we look forward to the expansion of the manufacturing apprenticeship program, and the TTMA is willing to work very closely with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Trade to point these programs in the right direction and to plug the skills gaps in particular industries. Ladies and gentlemen, our country, the economic fundamentals are sound, and our country is on a good path for economic recovery. And we in the non-energy business community are definitely doing our part. This fact is grounded in a survey conducted recently by the TTMA, which shows that investments by local businesses just in our sector, and this was not a comprehensive survey, in our sector between 2022 and 2023 amounted to $1.3 billion, and this is capital investment in plant and machinery. And these investments leaded an additional employment of 1,037 workers. I want you to give yourselves a round of applause for that, because some of the investors are in this room today. These figures are testimony that the non-energy manufacturers contribute significantly to moving the country forward. We are ready to take on the challenge to assist greatly with the diversification thrust of the government. However, we need the government support, and we see that the government is doing a lot of things to enable businesses to thrive and to grow in Trinidad and Tobago. Let me give you an example, a tangible example of one of the investments, and I use this example because this company is also one of our sponsors. The Ansomakal Group has invested $200 million in Carib Brewery, and this will increase the brewery's production capacity, which will meet the demand of the local market and facilitate increased exports. This returnable bottle technology is the most advanced in the world at the moment and is in keeping with Carib's sustainable business model and practices for more energy efficient production and also a reduction in waste. It will provide the opportunity to upskill current workers and create some additional employment. This is a $200 million investment by Carib in additional capacity without displacing current workers, 4.2 industrial technology, and Carib and the Ansomakal Group must be commended for this investment. It was the largest investment among the survey we did among our members. In this regard, we want to emphasize, and we are all aware in the private sector, that the best laid plans are noteworthy and well-intentioned, but to remain just that if implementation is not pursued vigorously. We, the TTMA, and just for those of you who may not know the size and strength of the TTMA, we have a 20-person secretariat that is responsible for research and development, monitoring government policy, doing private sector development, as well as leading the thrust in exports and helping to diversify the economy. And we'll be monitoring these initiatives and to ensure that we help and provide the assistance to ensure that the timelines are met with regards to these programs and incentives outlined by the Honourable Minister. And we remain ready and willing to work with all ministries, state enterprises, and other government bodies in this regard. As I bring my short remarks to an end, I would like to express my gratitude once again to the Honourable Minister of Finance, who will be delivering the feature address and joining us in the panel today. His presence underscores the importance of collaboration between government and the private sector in shaping policies and supporting our industries. And this will obviously augur well for economic progress and further development. I encourage everyone present and those watching via our online platform to actively participate in our discussions. Your insights, questions, perspectives are invaluable as we collectively chart the course for our manufacturing sector and, by extension, our beloved country. In closing, let us approach these discussions with open continues to thrive, innovate, and contribute to the prosperity of our nation. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
As we always do, to give assistance where it's needed for the overall rollout of government policies in Trinidad and Tobago. We have done that significantly with the Ministry of Trade, and in saying that, I would like to recognize among the audience here tonight, Ms. Eva Das, who is the newly minted Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Trade. Welcome, Ms. Eva Das. So, ladies and gentlemen, with those added responsibilities, it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, the Honourable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance. He's a qualified civil engineer with 2 degrees in engineering and 2 postgraduate degrees in law with specialization in construction contract law, arbitration, oil and gas law and energy, taxation policy. Professionally, Mr. Imbert is a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and registered with the Board of Engineering on Trinidad and Tobago. He's currently completing a master's degree in finance with a specialization in economic policy at the University of London, which when completed will give him his 4th master's degree. You know, my staff tell me, Ramesh, you know, you're a very degreed person with 3 degrees. But here the minister has 4 master's degrees. Kudos to you, Minister. Apart from being one of the most prolific debaters in Parliament, having contributed to almost 1,000 debates, he has served as an elected PNM Member of Parliament for 32 continuous years and as a cabinet minister in 6 PNM government administrations for an aggregate cabinet experience of over 21 years in several different and diverse ministries in Trinidad and Tobago. On August 10, 2020, Mr. Imbert was re-elected for the 9th time to the House of Representatives as the member for Diego Martin Northeast. Minister Imbert was first appointed as Minister of Finance in 2015 and has served as the Minister of Finance for the last 8 years, delivering 9 annual budgets. Mr. Imbert has also acted as the Prime Minister in the absence of the substantive Prime Minister on several occasions over the last 8 years. Mr. Imbert, welcome to the podium.
Good afternoon. They gave me a very long salutation list, and I will simply say all protocols observed. And thank you for reading the short version of my biography. There's a long version circulating somewhere, which drives me crazy. I heard a comment made by our Master of Ceremonies. And I also heard a comment made by Wade George that he said I have a lot of stamina. It's always very interesting to deliver a budget speech because a decision has to be made as to how long should the speech be. Now, there have been ministers of finance in the past who ran through a speech in about 32 minutes. I think that's the record for the shortest speech, and simply announced, these are the fiscal measures, tax. This is a new tax. We're changing this. We're giving 25 million for single mothers. 32 minutes. No philosophy, no policy whatsoever. But we felt that we should go the other way and try and explain as much as we could in terms of government policy, why we do what we do, what our plans are, what our achievements are, and what the policy is going forward. And that's why these speeches, unfortunately, have become 3 hours and 4 hours long. In fact, yesterday when I was talking, I was being urged to slow down. And I looked at the clock, and I thought to myself, but I've already spoken for 45 minutes, and I'm only on page 25 in a speech that is 136 pages long. So I did the maths, and I said, at my current rate, I'll take 4 hours. If I slow down, I might be here until after 6 o'clock. So I didn't slow down. But the whole point of the budget yesterday was to sort of pause a little bit and to target particular groups. So in developing the budget, we decided that we would look at the people who are most vulnerable in the society, people at the lowest end of the income spectrum, and see what we could do for them. That was the first plank of this year's budget address and this year's budget measures. The second plank was to continue what we've been doing for the last couple of years and try to stimulate the non-oil sector, and particularly deal with some issues that affect small and medium enterprises, who are the ones that need the most help at this point in time. So that's why when you look at what we're doing in the budget, we focus on the disadvantaged groups, and we try to see what else we can do to assist small and medium enterprises to grow their businesses. And we decided this year we wouldn't deal with other issues, because I had a lot of recommendations, and most of them were asking for a reduction in taxes or increase in a grant or something like that. And very few were looking at the things that we wanted to focus on, which is how to grow the economy, how to create jobs, how to grow businesses, how to earn foreign exchange, and things like that. So if you listen to the budget, you will see what the focus is. We wanted to let people know there are things we are looking at, and this is why I made a decision to indicate what the price of water is in Trinidad and Tobago as compared to other islands in the Caribbean, and what the price of electricity is in Trinidad and Tobago as compared to other islands in the Caribbean. And I was intrigued when the technocrats gave me the numbers for Barbados, where Barbados's rates are 5 times Trinidad, literally 5 times when you convert it to US dollars. And I don't mind giving a little tease every now and then. A businessman called me yesterday, and he said, could raise water rates, but don't raise electricity rates. So I said, why? I said, both of them cost us billions of dollars in subsidy every year. I say, so you're telling me that you don't mind paying a little more for water, but you won't pay a little more for electricity. I said that doesn't help us from the government level. And I want to tell you this, that you must always have a balanced view when you're looking at things. There's a comment in EY's commentary this morning about the petroleum taxation regime. Now, the problem with the petroleum taxation regime is that you have to strike a balance between incentivizing producers to explore, to drill, to come up with innovative ways of producing more oil and gas from mature fields, because this is a mature oil and gas province. We have been producing oil commercially for 100 years, literally. And in fact, there is a view that the first oil well ever drilled in the world that produced oil was in Trinidad and Tobago in Forest Reserve. But the fact is, we have been producing oil for 100 years. And our fields are mature, and it's always very, very difficult to produce oil at the same rate from an old field. You can see that with Woodside, for example. You know, when their production would start out at a very high rate, but because of our geology as well, the rates fall off very quickly. So you might start production at 15,000 barrels a day or 20,000 barrels a day in a field, and very quickly it drops down to 5,000. So we know there are issues outside there. We know that we need to motivate and incentivize oil and gas producers, especially small and medium-sized ones who are doing very, very well at this point in time. But the problem is that when you reduce taxation, you reduce supplementary petroleum tax, petroleum profits tax, or you give an accelerated capital expenditure write-off, your revenue drops. So you will get the benefits later on, years later, when production increases, but the gestation period between drilling a well, finding oil or gas, and then bringing it to market and producing could be 5-6 years. So that when you give up in terms of SPT and PPT and so on, you know that you're going to be reducing your revenue for a 5-year period. So you have to be very careful with these things. And therefore, you can't just rush at it and say, all right, I'm going to do a drastic reduction everywhere. You have to tweak it, because you have to do the maths. You have to see what a little adjustment does in terms of your revenue and what it will do in terms of motivating producers to produce more. And that's the strategy we've been using. We know what the producers want, and therefore we have to try and meet them and try and meet them halfway. And it's the same thing with corporation taxation and the non-oil sector. And one of the things we have to do as a government, there are so many incentives available to business in Trinidad and Tobago. And I remember I came to a function here, might have been last year, and Mr. Lockjack said that. And he said, look, we don't need any more incentives. No, that is Mr. Lockjack speaking. You know, he's unique. But he said that there's so many incentives, we don't need any more incentives, just pay the VAT refunds. That was his perspective. But the point, I'll come to VAT refunds in a little while, don't worry. But the point is that there are so many incentives for business in Trinidad and Tobago, but not all businesses take advantage of them. Some businesses don't even know that the incentives exist. And it is our job, therefore, as a government to educate, have outreach programs, show businesses, especially small and medium businesses, the suite of incentives that are available, and encourage them to take advantage of them. I'll give an example. During COVID, we created a loan guarantee program, especially targeting small businesses where the government guaranteed 100% of the loans, but they were small loans. It was cash flow loans to help businesses to meet their payroll and things like that. Relatively small loans, 300,000, 400,000, 100,000, that sort of thing, just to help them during the very difficult period of COVID. We decided that we would expand that. So we came up with another loan program. This time, we've increased the amount to $1.5 million. The government is guaranteeing 80% of that. But the uptake has not been what we expected. So when we dig and we say, what's the problem here? And I said something yesterday, which people don't know, that there are so many businesses in Trinidad and Tobago that don't have a business bank account. They operate using their personal bank account. They commingle funds. And this is really at the small, micro, and even medium level. And because they don't have a business bank account, they don't have financials. So that when they go for a loan, they can't present financials. Sometimes they don't have management accounts. They're using their personal credit card to purchase materials for the business. So you have an accounting problem, because then you have to get a reimbursement and prepare an invoice and all that sort of thing. And we really have to help all these small and micro businesses to become more professional in the way they do things, so that they must have accounts, they must be audited, they must have business bank accounts, and so on. They must be compliant in terms of NIS, in terms of income tax and VAT. There's so many people, and especially now with the new procurement legislation, which makes it mandatory that you must be compliant in terms of your income tax payments. You must be compliant in terms of your national insurance payment. There's so many businesses now can't qualify because they haven't had the discipline over the years to ensure they're compliant. I mean, I have people that talk to me all the time and say, do something. You know, I am not up to date with my taxes. I can't qualify to provide services to the government. And in fact, I had to tell one of them the other day, go to your accountant and bring your financials up to date. Because if you don't, you're just not going to qualify to provide government services. So this is a challenge we have. We need to have an outreach program, explain to businesses the services and the concessions and the incentives that are available, and then work with them to try and get them to access these services. But let me talk about VAT now. The interesting thing with VAT is that we're always running a huge liability in terms of VAT. And this was crystallized this year when we decided, okay, we're going to raise some bonds as we did before, and we're going to start to provide these VAT bonds, billions of dollars, $3 billion as a matter of fact. And then when I saw the structure of the VAT refunds, I was a little taken aback. Let's say we have $7 billion in VAT refunds. Believe it or not, $6 billion of that is in the energy sector. $1 billion is in the non-energy sector. And I thought to myself, you know, if we are dealing with VAT refunds, the people that really need help for their cash flow are the small businesses, the medium businesses, and so on. And that's just 1/7 of the problem. And really, on the next occasion, we will prioritize that set. So we will pay off that billion, and then we will deal with the other $6 billion. And then I thought to myself, how did we get to this stage where we owe the energy companies $6 billion in VAT refunds out of 7? And you know what it is? The energy sector is zero-rated, and therefore, every cent they pay in VAT, they automatically are entitled to a refund. And I can assure you they apply for their refunds religiously. So they pay it, and then they apply for it immediately. And we've been auditing them, and so far we haven't found anything out of the order. So you're going to have this problem all the time. So I'm looking at actually seeing whether I can exempt the energy sector from VAT so that we have no refunds. They pay no VAT, and we don't have to refund them. And then all I have to deal with is a liability of somewhere in the region of $1 billion a year, which we can easily manage. And that solves the TTMA problem immediately. So I'm just letting you know that we're not sleeping. We're thinking of ways and means of dealing with this VAT refund problem. I'm also looking at a sales tax. And it's not simple. It's easy to say, but not so easy to do. Because what you have to do is look at what is the revenue that you would get from a sales tax as compared to a value-added tax. What would the size of the sales tax be to give you the same quantum of revenue that you get from a value-added tax. How about compliance? Compliance in terms of a sales tax will present the same problems, maybe more, than value-added tax. The thing about value-added tax, it's added on at all the stages of the process. So you pay VAT as the goods come in, then as you add value and you sell it to somebody else, there's a VAT element there, then they may sell it to somebody else, there's another VAT element. So there are many ways of checking whether VAT is properly being assessed or not along the way, but a sales tax comes at the end. And if you have avoidance and evasion in a sales tax, you may find yourself, as a government, losing a lot of revenue. So we're looking at it very carefully. I would prefer a sales tax myself, so you don't have to give any refunds at all, and therefore this vexing problem of refunds and this problem businesses have that the government is not giving them back the cash that it owes them goes away. But then we have to look at compliance problems and we have to look at revenue problems. So just letting you know that is what we're thinking about as well. We're not sleeping. So there are two solutions to the VAT refund problem with the manufacturing sector. One is prioritize the manufacturing sector in terms of VAT refunds so that solves the problem. Or let's look at a sales tax. So we're looking at that. With respect to foreign exchange, we have deliberately supported the exchange rate. We did it for a reason, and that was to control inflation. And it certainly worked. When we came in 2015, inflation was about 5 or 6%. By not adjusting the exchange rate and for other reasons, it started to drop, 5, 4, 3, 2, and hit 1% in 2018 and went to 0.6% in 2019. Probably the lowest inflation rate in the world at that point in time, believe it or not. COVID came, supply chain problems, cost of shipping a container went from 2,000 US to 20,000 US. The price of grain went up by 50% or more. Price of everything, all imported materials just skyrocketed. So we had a lot of imported inflation. So our inflation rate started to climb. We still did much better than the rest of the world because we kept our exchange rate constant. So we didn't have a double whammy coming at us, imported inflation from the advanced economies and an exchange rate moving because we're in a financial crisis. So we avoided that problem. So we kept our inflation rate down to 5%, where other countries, UK, etc., 10%, 11% inflation. Caribbean, 18% inflation. So our reason for not adjusting the exchange rate is to keep inflation down. Because as soon as we let that rate go, you're going to have demands from the labor sector, and difficult to oppose those demands as well. Because if you devalue the currency and you let it move by 50% or 30%, whatever number it is, then the labor unions will say, all right, the cost of living has gone up, inflation just hit 20% because you did that, and now we want a 20% increase. So it also helps us in terms of dealing with collective bargaining. So at this point in time, this government is not going to adjust the exchange rate. But we understand the other problem, that once you don't do that, then there's an appetite for foreign consumption. There's an appetite to buy foreign goods. There's a demand for foreign exchange, and you have shortages. So it is something that I've decided. I had meetings with sorry to say this, I met with the Chamber of Commerce. I know I'm a TTMA function, but I just met with the Chamber of Commerce. I'll meet with the TTMA on Forex just now. And I asked them to give me some ideas and suggestions on how we deal with the Forex problem that we have. I met with the commercial banks. I asked them for some ideas, and I've been given some excellent proposals, and I also asked the Exim Bank to give me some ideas as well. And I can assure you from what I'm seeing, we will come up with a solution that will help. Now, our policy with the Exim Bank also is deliberate. It's not whimsical. Prior to creating the the foreign exchange windows at the Exim Bank, we had a system where the central bank would simply send money to the commercial banks, saying that trade is the primary purpose of this injection, because it's the government's reserves that the central bank puts into the system. And they would just tell the commercial banks, prioritize trade. But they wouldn't get more specific or granular. It was an honor system, and it wasn't working. So we decided, okay, we're going to use the Exim Bank and create windows for the import of essential items, such as essential foods, and also create a window to give manufacturers, especially export manufacturers, foreign exchange. So we've shifted, let's say, the total amount of US that might be put into the system by the central bank in the past was $2 billion US, just using a round number. Now what you see is that the central bank may put in 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion, and the remainder is sent to the Exim Bank. So if 2 billion US of the government's reserves is injected into the system every year, we now have Exim may have 700 million of that, and the commercial banks get 1.3. We're going to keep adjusting that because it has worked out in a very strange way. I didn't expect the system at the Exim Bank to work in the way that it did. It's working fantastically well. And we're going to keep putting more money into that system. And this is why we will most likely start up a Forex window at the Exim Bank for small and medium enterprises. We have to be careful because there are a lot of them. And they consume a lot of foreign exchange. So you have to be careful, but we're going to do it. And when I told that to the commercial banks, that we will have a Forex window specifically for small and medium enterprises, the commercial banks had an idea. They said, well, when the central bank is giving us Forex, why don't you ask them to specify that a percentage of the money they give us must go to small and medium enterprises? And I thought that wasn't a bad idea. So we're also looking at that to see whether we could also create a special window within the commercial banks for small and medium enterprises. But I think we will be able to find a solution. With respect to repatriation of Forex, I'm not sure who said it, it could be Mr. George, that if you're earning foreign exchange, why bring it back? Because the rate of, I look at the treasury rates all the time. I had to look at it very closely recently when we were refinancing a very large bond, a 550 million US bond on the international capital market. And we had to be very careful because the 4-month treasury note rate now is 5.5%. So if you are a businessman and you have earned US dollars by exporting to the US, let's say, and you have a choice to make, put your money into, and the 1-month treasury rate is also quite astonishing, 5.3 or 5.4%. So you could put your money into a 1-month treasury note in the States and get an annualized rate of over 5%. So if you have that opportunity available to you, and you have to choose between that, putting your money there and earn a good rate, or using it to purchase your raw materials and your finished goods and so on, you may very well decide you will put some money into the US Treasury notes, but that doesn't help the country. And that's a problem we need to solve, because if the government is giving manufacturers its foreign reserves, we have to tie a condition to it that you have to repatriate. I understand the risk problem, that if you repatriate, are you sure you're going to be able to get access to it? I understand that problem. And that's something we need to discuss with the banks, that if people bring their US back that they've earned from exports, they have to get access to it. So these are things that we have to discuss. We have to discuss these things because the problems are known and there are solutions. In terms of the economy, it's growing. You'll have seen that. You know, we had economic growth last year. We have economic growth this year. One of the reasons why I'm so glad I'm here, I mean, there are many, but the main one is that as a country and a government, we have to focus on the manufacturing sector. The other sectors import. You export. You create, they consume. I'm sorry to be so blunt about this. So that if you're looking at two sectors and one is consuming resources and the other is creating resources, then surely the one that is creating resources is the one that you should favor. And that's why I'm here. And I'm not saying that just so. I mean it. Because when I look at the manufacturing sector, and Minister Gopiskoon clued me in a couple years ago as to what's happening. There's been a fantastic performance by the manufacturing sector in terms of growth. When I look at the growth of the manufacturing sector in 2022, for example, the energy sector is difficult. To maintain production is hard. And therefore, what Ministry of Energy is doing, working with the oil and gas companies, is at least try to maintain production, because we know it's hard, because mature fields, declining reserves, that sort of thing, going into the deep water, more difficult. We know that. So what energy is doing right now is trying to maintain the level and then get new projects and new sources and then boost the level, which is what we truly expect. I mean, we do expect with the Manatee field that will come on stream shortly and the Dragon field, which looks as if it's going to go ahead, that we do expect that right now our current production of natural gas is 2.7 billion cubic feet, but we do expect to get back up to 3 and 3.5 and up to the magic number of 4 billion cubic feet of gas per day, which is what the built capacity in our process center, LNG, petrochemical, methanol, etc. They need 4 billion standard cubic feet of gas per day. Right now they get in 2.7. So there is this spare capacity of, it's actually 4.2 is the built capacity. They're getting 2.7. They need another 1.5 billion, but we do feel we will get there with everything that we're doing. But while the energy sector is sorting out its issues, and I mean there's tremendous work going on there, and Minister Young has to be congratulated for what he's doing. I want to say that here today. What he's doing in terms of the various initiatives to have a long-term future for gas supply for this country, because if you can't get it out of the ground in Trinidad and Tobago, you have to try and get it somewhere else. And that's what it's all about. So if our production capacity in Trinidad is at most 3 billion standard cubic feet per day now, that's all we get out of our territory, then the other billion has to come from somewhere. And that's why this initiative with Venezuela is so important, and other discussions with other neighboring territories that may have gas available. So that's the policy. Let's try and get our gas supply up to 4 billion cubic feet a day. And since we may only be able to produce 3, you have to look for other sources of the 1, because it doesn't really matter where it comes from, because you're supplying the petrochemical industry, you're supplying the LNG industry and so on. And that's where the added value is. That's where the job creation is. That's where the wealth creation is, because those companies are here in Trinidad and Tobago. But we had a situation of the energy sector more or less treading water for 22, and we expect the same thing in 2023. The output from the energy sector, we don't expect any miraculous increase in 2023, and so on. 2024, we do expect an increase. So in the meantime, what do you rely on as a country? Manufacturing sector, non-oil sector. And when I looked at the numbers, I saw that oil and gas contracted by 0.3%, which isn't that much. But the manufacturing and the non-oil sector in particular, let's call it non-oil, so it also includes services of all types, expanded by 5.8%, almost 6%. And that is where we got the growth from. So we got our growth in 2022 because the other side of the economy expanded by almost 6%. And that is the future going forward. And therefore, we as a government have to try to continue to do whatever we can to support the manufacturing sector, to help you to penetrate markets. I know that's what trade is doing all the time. They're always trying to create new markets for our products, deal with tariff barriers, deal with all sorts of marketing issues and so on. That's what the Ministry of Trade is doing all the time, and we will continue to help you along those lines. So I wouldn't want to take up too much more of your time. I just want to explain that this year's budget had two purposes. Help the people at the lowest end. This is why we decided to increase the minimum wage, and I'm very comforted to hear that it's not a problem. And I'm seeing that from all the business groups, all the chambers, the big chambers, the small chambers, everybody's saying that the $20.50 is not a problem, because we were worried about it, because we know what the problem is. If you put that wage too high, a business has to look at its expenses, and labor is an expense. And therefore, if the cost of labor is too much in percentage terms or dollar terms, then what you're going to do? You're going to retrench. We know. So that we need to be careful about this, and I'm so happy to hear that the rate that we chose, that $3 increase, which is a significant increase, 17%, and when we did the maths, some minimum wage workers will get as much as $500 extra per month. Some might get $900, security guards and so on. And it's tax-free because they're below the threshold in terms of the tax rate. So we're very gratified that this has not created a problem for the business community, and we could give help to people at that lowest end of the spectrum. And then we have other things that we decided to do, the book grant and so on. As an MP myself, I am faced with endless of my constituents coming to me every August. Mr. Imbert, I have a book list. Would you help me, please? And when I look at the book list, it's $3,000. And that's why we're also dealing with this problem with textbooks. And we expect pushback. We expect it. We've been around for a while, you know. We didn't come in town last. So we know that from the time you start talking about standardizing textbooks, the booksellers going to start to make noise. We know that. But that's not the point. When I was growing up, I was able to go to a second-hand bookstore. I heard Stuart Young talk about that, and get books that somebody else had used in the school the year before. And it was the same book. And the same book had been used in the schools for years. And I'm talking about things like physics and mathematics and chemistry. These things don't change much. Obviously, history and things like that are going to change. But there's no reason why you would change a chemistry textbook. I mean, I know the Minister of Education is a chemist, and I'm sure she could attest to that. But the chemical reaction remained the same, you know. It didn't change, right? The physics, it remained the same. The maths 2 and 2 is still 4. So we knew that when we said we're going to look at standardizing textbooks so you have generational passing on. So one generation can pass on the books to another generation, and you don't have a situation where they change one page in the maths textbook, and therefore the old textbook has to be discarded. We knew we would get pushback, but that's okay. We will handle that. So when, as an MP, I say to myself, but what's going on here? These people, these are needy parents, and it is both male and female. It's not limited to women only, needy parents, and they have 3 children, they have 4 children, and each book list is $3,000. And they have to buy a book bag, and they have to buy shoes, and they buy a uniform. So that's why we decided to do the grant, the school supplies grant, because we felt in this budget we will help people at that end. And then we have all our training programs. That was another feature that we're looking at enhancing and building training in tech, VOC in particular. If you look in the budget, you'll see the emphasis we put into providing allocations to the Ministry of Youth and National Service, Ministry of Education. It's in the tech VOC area. And that's where, you know, we believe that you need people coming out with the requisite skills to work in a factory. The people that work in a factory don't have to be rocket scientists, but they must be skilled. They have to have a skill. And if we can train them in technical and vocational areas, then it's better for you and it's better for us as a country. So that is what this budget is all about. And I think I will stop now, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, Honourable Minister Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance. The Minister touched on a number of issues. He went broad and wide on a number of deliverables on the budget yesterday. So now you guys have a chance to participate in this process. It leaves me at this stage to invite the moderator, Mr. Roach, to come to the podium, and members of the panel, Dr. Ramkissoon, Mr. Wade, and Minister Imbert. The minister talked about correlations and forging and not changing of chemistry, and the TTMA is going to continue in this stead. We're going to continue to push and persevere to ensure that manufacturers are able to capture market opportunities, work together with the Ministry of Trade, work together with our brothers and sisters in the private sector, create market opportunities for you guys. We want you all to work with us while we work with you all to create that enabling environment. I think the minister is being mic'd up, so I'm trying to buy some time here. Speak to some issues that I may not be a specialist on. So the others who are mic'd up, you can come, have a seat. So let me reiterate that you will have an opportunity to engage with the panelists. Mr. Roach will moderate. I already sent the number for those of you who want to engage the process by WhatsApp. You will have a chance. There are mics strategically placed on the floor. It's very difficult for us to see where the mics is here because of the light. So, Mr. Roach, I turn you over now to Mr. Roach.
What about the consultant?
Well, it depends. We could go.
Okay, let me invite the panelists to please have a seat.
Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the minister has assured me that he has cleared his schedule for us this afternoon, so he feel free to. But there's one caveat. There's one caveat to that. We want to get as many persons asking questions. And we don't, so please, if you could be succinct in terms of the number of questions that you have, so that we can get a wide variety of questions, so that we can engage the panel accordingly. So based on that, I will not ask any seed questions. I may ask an intermittent question if there's a break in the program. So without further ado, I would like to open the floor immediately for questions. And please, when you come to the mic, if you could announce your name and if you represent any particular organization, please let us know, so at least we'll know where the question is coming from. Unfortunately for me, I cannot see the microphones too good because of this light in my eye. I don't know if any adjustment could be made.
Yeah, those lights.
But I open the floor for questions.
Hello, good afternoon. Ryan Hamilton Davis, Trinidad Newsday. This is more or less for the business community. I mean, one worry for some of the people regarding the increase in wages is that it may roll over in some strange cost of doing business and result in an increase in prices overall. I just was hoping that the business community, even through you or anyone else, could respond to that and maybe allay some fears whether or not this is a possibility, and if it is a possibility, what could be done about that in particular?
It sounds like you're trying to engage me in the panel discussion, but I will ask anyone from the panel if they want to take a bite at it.
I don't mind talking. I mean, I'm not a member of the business community, but you can't look at things like that. The fact of the matter is that the minimum wage was low. And what you're going to do, if you adopt the position that if you increase the minimum wage, it would lead to increased costs, then you would never increase the minimum wage. So you have to look at it from the other side, that you're going to increase it to help people who are not earning much, and you don't increase it too much, so that it gets to the point where it gets into that paradigm that you're talking about, that look, it becomes an expense that is difficult to absorb, and therefore you pass on the cost. But that can't be the policy. The policy has to be that is it a fair wage or not? And we decided that we needed to increase the minimum wage, and the consequences will flow from that. And the last time that we increased it, I did a study. We didn't do it whimsically in the Ministry of Finance. I tasked some of my technocrats to actually do a study about the inflation pass-through of the last increase in the minimum wage. And it was minimal, believe it or not. Most businesses absorbed the last increase in the minimum wage and did not pass it on to the consumer. But the fact is, you have to look at the person who is receiving the wage rather than what you are talking about.
I'll give away for somebody else.
Mr. Roach.
Go ahead.
I hear the question from the businessman. I think for some small businesses, we can expect that there is going to be an impact. My view is, though, that in a competitive market, different businesses will behave differently, and therefore any costs, whether this is cost of electricity or whatever, the competition in the market is likely to dictate whether you pass it on, how much you pass on, because you would look at the ultimate price of that product or service you're selling. The other point I wish to make is that we really should have as a goal the attempt to lift everyone away from a minimum wage. In other words, we want to be producing goods and services that employs as many people as possible at a much higher than a minimum wage, because the idea must be to have a society in which people can afford decent living. Everybody. And I think that that must be the goal. The third point I wish to make is that businesses, if they find that costs of labor is too high, then it is natural they do the other thing, which is to become more capital intensive, to use machinery, different systems, so that they will not have to employ as much labor as possible. With the training that the minister has mentioned, and I think that apprenticeship training, I think, is very, very important. It is going to take a number of workers to a higher level and to higher payment, and I think that that is part of the answer to socio-economic development on the whole. So.
Thank you very much. I would just like to add that there's a minimum wage and then there's a living wage. And we as business people have to be cognizant of the issues that employees are facing, and we have to make those adjustments accordingly. And why the TTMA could support, or I should say not object to where the minimum wage has gone, is because we in fact did a study among our members and found that among our membership, businesses were already paying on average above the stated minimum wage, so that employees could have afforded the inflationary pressures that were put on them over the last couple of years. We're happy that those things have stabilized, and we want to make sure that putting more disposable income into the economy benefits the economy. I now open the floor to another question.
Joel Real, TV6 News. Just a question to the Finance Minister, seeking clarification on the issue of fuel prices. Heard no mention of that in the budget. Is it safe to say, therefore, that depending on the prices as they would be internationally, if they are low to a certain extent, that we could possibly see a lower price at the pump for gasoline and diesel during fiscal 2024?
Oh, Jewel, you know you work for the OCM group, who did that lovely front page story on Monday about the millionaire tax, the fictional millionaire tax. And then when I actually read the meat of the story, I saw that you were hinting that we would increase the price of gasoline as well. So you're all really good, when you all make up stories. So I wasn't surprised that you would ask me about that, because you have to, what you call it, trump and follow through. When you do stupidness, you have to trump and follow through and double down, I think. The fact of the matter is that prices are so volatile. I have looked at the price of oil over the last couple of months, and it's unbelievable what's happening with the price. It dropped down to $70, just like that. Then it's gone up to $90. I haven't checked to see what it was today, but a couple days ago, I was quite shocked to see the price of Brent oil hit $97. I think it was 95 on budget day. That is such an unpredictable environment. So many things are going on. You have the three big players in the oil world. You have United States, Saudi Arabia, Russia. Those are the three big players. Anytime something happens with any of those three, the price of oil changes. And right now, there's a move by Saudi Arabia and Russia to get the price up. We don't know what would happen next year. You have US elections coming, so there may be some pressure being put on the players to get the price down. The fact of the matter is, we as a government can't have a knee-jerk reaction. We have to watch this thing. Because if, for example, we were to adjust the price of gas now, and next week oil hits $100, that is going to create problems for us in terms of the fuel subsidy. You would have seen in the budget statement, I said that in 2022, the fuel subsidy was $2.4 billion. We didn't plan for that. We planned for just over $1 billion. And therefore, we had to find that extra $1.4 billion. And it has to come from somewhere. It doesn't grow on a tree. So when you have to subsidize gas to the tune of $2.4 billion, when you budgeted only for $1 billion, it puts pressure on other areas of the budget. So we're going to keep prices at the current level for now. And we will keep monitoring and see whether these trends that we're seeing, or oil is going 90 to 70, 70 to 90, 80, 85, 95, just all over the place, to see whether there's any trend that is outside there, or whether we can't predict what's going to happen. So the answer is, we are not raising the price of gas, if that is your question.
Okay. We have any other questions from the floor?
Good.
Minister.
Sorry, good afternoon.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Andrew Jeffers, Head of Strategy and Growth at Anson McCall Group. Question directed to the Honourable Minister. You spoke to the repatriation of U.S. hard currency, and particularly with an export focus. Alongside that, another version of that is encouraging local, small, medium-sized conglomerates to invest directly, for instance, in United States businesses, and then have the dividend income come back in. Have you all looked at, or have you had a look or started any discussions around some of the, what can appear to be disincentives to that around the withholding tax regime, more preferential rates on taxes from dividends coming from direct investments in the US, to encourage more of particularly those that are able and looking for those investments in the US to be able to have more incentives both for that acquisition debt and potential withholding tax there, and then on the currency earned there, having preferential rates to come back into parent in Trinidad.
Very interesting point you've made, Mr. Jeffers, formerly of Heritage, I believe. I don't know what's going on. One day you're working Heritage, next day you're working at Samarkand. But anyway, that's very interesting. And if there is an opportunity to assist local businesses to invest in U.S. businesses and then repatriate the dividends, you would certainly be amenable to helping there. And that's one of the type of discussions that we will be having with the banking sector and the Chamber of Commerce and the TTMA to see what we can do to deal with this problem that we have with availability of foreign exchange. So thank you for raising that, and I may ask one of our expert consultants, EY, to give us some ideas on that, as long as they behave themselves.
Well, maybe
Minister,
let
if I
me
may-
bring Wade into the conversation
sure.
to comment on that.
Happy to comment on that. So the issue is that the double taxation treaty with the United States of America is dated. It was signed in 1971. And as a result, it was sort of unilateral in the type of withholding tax relief provided. Interestingly enough, the reason for that was that it was concern at the time in Trinidad and Tobago that if the United States reduced the withholding tax on dividends significantly, it could lead to capital flight.
From the
Now,
US,
so we are
all
far away
policies.
from that. And what we really need to do, because it's a 50-year-old double tax treaty, is to approach the United States government and renegotiate. Obviously, it will take some time. It's not something that would be done overnight, but in my experience, they would be open to that because they want to modernize their treaty network, and so it could alleviate those concerns. Because it is somewhat of a double taxation environment when Trinidad and Tobago-based businesses invest in the United States. They suffer the corporation tax at the US level, and then the withholding tax, which is 30%, is very onerous. So the net take back into Trinidad would be fairly significant and would be a deterrent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I must say, though, that I can tell the audience that when I went to Washington in April to the IMF meetings, I had some meetings with the US Treasury, and they are very amenable to working with the government of Trinidad and Tobago to deal with all sorts of issues, including that. So I think we can initiate the discussions right away. So thanks for that suggestion.
Good. Very good.
Good afternoon. Dale Parson.
Good afternoon.
TTMA Vice President. Minister, I think you and the team have been doing a very good job of delivering a very well-balanced budget. It's very clear and logical, most of the actions taken and delivered in the budget speech. I just want to ask one question, well, there's two questions really, and it's about the port scanners, the $90 million assigned to the port scanners, and the TTRA. I know that before I ask it, you might say that the port scanners implementation might be handled by the procurement regulators, or it might be stuck somewhere. I just want to ask, when do you foresee these two items being actioned, the port scanners and TTRA, to come into action? I'll tell you why. The port scanners is really needed by the business community. As you probably may or may not know, some of the bonds are currently closed, and it's causing a huge congestion in Pleb Deco in particular, because a lot of the cargo for examination is going to Pleb Deco. And this is really impeding a lot of legitimate raw material importers whose cargo gets stuck for one reason or the other. It's like Peter paying for Paul, because we bringing in legitimate raw materials, and most of it is going back for re-export. So we just would like to find out, the question really is if you have a definitive deadline when you think these two should be implemented. Thanks.
Sure. With respect to the scanners, I did say in the budget yesterday that a contract has been awarded. So we have passed the issues of procurement. The scanners are not simple things. They're quite complex. And as you know, these are not shelf items. So having awarded the contract, they're now into the manufacturing stage of the scanners. I do expect them in 2024. To give you an exact date, I would not want to do that, because that's completely outside my control. But we will be pushing them because we want the scanners as well. So we have reached the point where we have resolved the procurement issue. We went out to tender, they shortlisted 2. The customs team went and visited and saw the scanners in actual operation. They were very careful about it. It caused a delay, of course, But when they explained to me that they need to see the scanners working in a port environment to make the final decision, I couldn't tell them no. So the teams went abroad. They looked at the two operations. I think one was in Mexico and one was in Europe. I believe that's what it is. And they selected one, and we've awarded the contract. So I will now push them to get the manufacturing done as quickly as possible and get those scanners in as quickly as possible. But we've crossed the procurement hurdle. Just wanted to tell you that. With respect to the TTRA, we are going full speed ahead. We have legal challenges. The opposition is in court, and I mean the opposition, because when we go there, it's all the opposition lawyers that we meet in court, and they don't want the TTRA to go ahead. They're opposing us, and we are dealing with it. So we've had a challenge in the High Court. We had a challenge in the Appeal Court. We won both of them. They wouldn't say that. So they're now going up to the Privy Council, so we'll see where that goes, okay? And there's a substantive matter still to be heard, so I don't want to comment too much. But the thing with the TTRA is that until we are stopped, we are proceeding, and we are very hopeful that we will be successful with the TTRA. So TTRA is recruiting. They've made some recommendations in terms of the key staff, and we got advice. I was able to give them some expert consultants who had worked with other transitions from a public service, customs and inland revenue environment into a semi-autonomous revenue authority. We brought some experts in. The experts were extremely helpful. I'll give you an idea of brilliant advice they gave us that happened in another country, just to speed up things, that when you make an offer to the employees in the public service, tell them that the terms and conditions will be almost the same. So they will know, there's certainty. That was one of the problems. If I'm a customs officer and I'm moving from customs and I'm moving to the TTRA, what kind of job am I getting? Where am I in the system? And that was one of the recommendations. Give them the comfort that they won't lose any position, they won't lose any benefits or anything like that. So I'm telling you all of this because it's not a simple thing, and I have to be careful what I say. But anything I say, I will see it in an affidavit in the court to be used against me. Pardon? No, at all. You see, because they are in the public service right now, they are subject to the Public Service Commission, and they are subject to the work rules in the public service and so on. That is not going to be the situation in the TTRA. A lot of the people will come, we expect, but the culture will be completely different. Okay, but again, I have to be careful what I say. All right?
Okay. Are there any more questions from the floor? So let me ask one before my good friend comes back to the microphone. Minister, in light of the fact that we are once again running a deficit budget, are the government considering any additional revenue earning initiatives to curb that deficit?
The problem we have as a country, and whenever I give the history, people say, well, why are you going back in the past? I have to. The country had built up an unsustainable expenditure profile. We went from $45 billion government expenditure in 2010 to $62 billion government expenditure in 2014 and 2015. So it went up by almost 50%. But the revenue profile didn't go up by 50%. So you had expenditure going from 45 to 62, but revenue wasn't coming up to meet it. So that when we came in, we met this expenditure profile, $60 billion expenditure profile. And then we were hit by, a double whammy, where price of oil dropped, tax regime had been adjusted. And I remember one of the big players in the system coming to see us and showing us a presentation where they said, well, we won't be giving you any revenue until the year 2024. I remember that. I still remember that. As clear as day. 2015, one of the largest revenue providers in Trinidad and Tobago saying, well, this is what's going to happen. You won't get any money from us for the next 9 years. So we had to make some adjustments. So you have to understand the problem we have. We reduced expenditure from 60 to 50. That's the first thing we had to do. So we did fiscal consolidation. And that's based on advice. It wasn't done by VAPS either. The expert said you have to get your expenditure profile down. So we did, 60 to 50. But what does that do? It squeezes. So it squeezes the economy. You have unpaid bills. You have liabilities building up. You have a country that's accustomed to a $60 billion expenditure. You're now telling them run at 50. Well, nobody's going to like that. So what we have been looking at is how much money do we need to spend to maintain economic momentum. If you look at this year's budget, you will see it's $59 billion. Of that, $1 billion is back pay. So we're really looking, that's a one-off. So you're really looking at a $58 billion expenditure. And we felt after 8 years, we couldn't keep it at 50. We have to get it up. And especially when you look at capital expenditure, we were running a public sector investment program around $4 billion, and we have decided that's where you need to spend your money. You need to spend your money in construction and areas like that. So we've taken our public sector expenditure element from $4 billion to $6 billion. So we added 2. We have made a decision. We are going to spend that amount of money, $58 billion, not 50. And we're going to try and get the revenue up to that same level. If we can't, we will run a deficit budget because we're looking at spending money to grow the economy. And we believe that as you go along, even though you're running a deficit budget, the expenditure creates jobs, creates economic activity, creates the environment for revenue to go. So we will continue to run deficit budgets for the next couple of years. And when we meet with the rating agencies, we tell them that. We are trying to boost the productive sector, so we're trying to spend a little more money. And we will be running deficit budgets. But it's perfectly acceptable. Most countries in the world do it. So why should Trinidad and Tobago run a surplus? We are not in an IMF program, and I want to make this point. Jamaica is in an IMF program. So the IMF has told Jamaica, you must post a fiscal surplus of 1% or 2% of GDP. How does Jamaica post a fiscal surplus? They cut back on expenditure. So public servants are retrenched, subsidies are removed, and so on. So it's not a nice place to be in. Barbados in the same thing. You have to post a fiscal surplus. So if your revenue isn't matching your expenditure, and the IMF tells you post a surplus, you have to cut expenditure. So it's not a nice place to be in. We are not in an IMF program, and we will be running fiscal deficits for a couple years to boost the productive sector, the productive part of the economy. That's the policy. Okay?
Thank you, Minister. Dr. Ramkissoon, I know you want to weigh in on this topic.
A couple points. One, when I read Vision 2030, I see which the Minister recommends, I see that we were supposed to be in a surplus, a fiscal surplus a couple of years ago. And to maintain that surplus, of course, COVID-19 came, and we know the kinds of challenges of an energy economy. I must say we must always remind ourselves that we are a mineral-based economy. And mineral-based economies all over the world have this bad habit of finding it very easy to spend, in particular when you operate a democratic system where each government, or let me put it the other way, the opposition always attempt to do one better than the existing government by promising to spend more and to spend on a whole range of things. We see that playing out right now, only to find out if and when that particular government gets into office, that really, they can't spend that money because the revenue side is very difficult. No government likes to increase taxes. Raising revenue is very, very difficult for all kinds of reasons, facing all kinds of protests and so on. But mineral-based economy, we sort of put that behind us until the issue arises, or issues arise like we are facing now. We are now finding out that we cannot subsidize water as we used to. We cannot subsidize electricity. We're still subsidizing foreign exchange, but it's a kind of what my grandmother used to call a bad habit that we get, everyone across the board. And there are times when it becomes extremely difficult to take the bitter medicine. And therefore, we have to be extremely careful. I want to make the other point that when having growth is very positive, very good. Growth of a company, growth of a country. We have a country like Guyana doing 30, 40% growth. We're fighting hard to make our 1%, 2%, 3%. Growth is good. In an economy that is mineral-based, oil, now gas-based, if that growth comes from your non-energy sector, and it is not net foreign exchange earning, you will get growth. You will have a deficit budget, you will spend money, but what you are going to find is that you are going to be depleting your foreign exchange reserves. Because that growth is consuming 80-90% of our foreign reserves. So you're getting growth in some cases, but it is costing you in foreign exchange reserves. So if you make the choice, and we must understand choices, it's good to have choices. The minister has a particular choice. Countries make choices, but you've got to understand that for a country, like in personal lives, when you make a choice, there are certain costs to that, and you must be fully aware of the costs and therefore be mindful of the need to balance, as the minister started saying in his presentation a little while ago, the need for equilibrium, the need to balance as you go along. So those are my comments, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Wade, you want to weigh in on this topic?
I mean, I think it's been going on for a while, but I would say that this is why it's important that we make certain adjustments now, because clearly there are adjustments needed, and that's why I spoke to the need to stabilize the revenue base. And people react almost violently to the concept of property tax, but property tax is a completely well-established international means of stabilizing the revenue base. Now, of course, we can argue on the fringes about certain elements like how you would tax industrial plant and machinery, but most other territories in the world, as the minister pointed out, you're paying on the cap value or the capital value, and it's upwards of 0.75 to 1%. And yet still, when we ease this in on the annual rateable value, there is huge upheaval. That's just a transition issue and not being accustomed. And especially when you direct that now to local government, I think you can get a more direct benefit. So yes, because of the frame, because of what we see in terms of the contraction in production, and of course we want to play for the upside in the future, then adjustments have to be made. And it's going to be, some of the adjustments are difficult. And I have never interacted with a client that wants to pay more tax. So I quite fully understand the difficulty of it, but it's the reality that we face, and it's going to take these types of measures over a period of time to stabilize the system and wean the reliance on one sector. So
Thank you very much. On the last point with regards to property tax, we look forward, Minister, to engaging with your ministry to have discussions on how this tax will apply sometime in the future to in industrial users, because plant and equipment, as you know, assessing the value of that is quite subjective, and we will have to engage in some discussions before that happens. But generally, we normally apply a certain level of reasonableness to things, and when it comes sometime in the future, we will apply that same metric and engage in those discussions with an open mind.
I'm glad you've given me that entry there. I've lost count of the amount of times I've said that we are starting with residential property tax, and I've explained why. Because we want to give a stable, sustainable revenue stream to local government. And we said why there too. Because one of the problems with local government is people really feel that that system produces very little. You know, it's a huge expense. It costs the country billions of dollars, or at least $1 billion, to maintain our local government apparatus. But what do you get out of it? So people are not happy with the local government productivity at all. When you go to the local government practitioners now and they say, what's the problem? We're spending $1 billion, $2 billion on this thing. Why aren't you producing? We have no money. So you say, okay, what do you need money for? We need money for materials, we need money to buy equipment, no problem. So the residential property tax system dovetails into that. It's going to be collected by the local government bodies, and we are going to amend the legislation so that they can only spend the property tax on goods and services and the development program. Because there's no point in putting hundreds of millions of dollars of property tax into a local government system, and all they do is put that on the personnel side, so they just employ more people who will also have no materials and no equipment to work with. So instead of having 5,000 workers with no materials, no vehicles, no equipment, you now have 10,000 workers who have no vehicles, no equipment. So we are amending the law so that property tax can only be used for equipment, materials, construction, patching roads, cleaning drains, collecting garbage, things like that, which is what people want. So that our focus on getting this property tax system going is to give local government that money that they need to get things done and improve their productivity, improve their service, so you actually see something happening. And they're going to have to account as well, so that we will have a new system as well that you can challenge them. Citizens can challenge the corporations and say, tell us what you've done with this property tax. Show us the potholes that you patched. Show us the water courses that you cleaned. And that's why we're going ahead with property tax at this time. And I've said it a number of times. I've seen it again today. Hope you're recording me. That when we come to the valuation of plant and machinery, we will sit down with industry and we will discuss it and try and reach consensus, and we will not just willy-nilly wake up one morning and start to tax plant and equipment. Have I made myself clear?
Minister, I purposely gave you that segue so you could elaborate on the point, so that our members and our guests will hear directly from you. We're also happy to hear that the way in which the money will be spent will be regulated, so that we can see results when the money is in fact collected by the corporate bodies. I have another question from the floor.
Yeah, Ryan Hamilton Davis again, on the property tax topic. Well, two questions real quick, right? First, on property tax, does government anticipate an increase in rent or the cost of properties or anything like that coming out of the property tax? And actually, I'm hoping to hear from Mr. Roach again concerning foreign direct investment and the trade missions. I know you've been on several. And how has that affected the foreign trade investments and so on, foreign direct trade, and how has that brought in, forex, that sort of stuff, the relationships and so on from outside?
Okay. So, Minister, you want to?
Well, this is just like the question on the minimum wage. It's the same theme.
Yes.
Interesting that is the same theme. The whole point is we're doing it for a reason. We are giving the local government corporations these funds so that they can deal with a problem. Because we all have a problem. When we go into our neighborhoods, we're not satisfied with the level of the infrastructure. We're not satisfied with something as mundane as garbage collection. We're not satisfied. So we're solving the problem. So if it has a consequence, then it's all about balance. Do you continue with the situation where local government corporations are unproductive and your roads are not paved, your water courses are not cleaned, your garbage is not collected, your recreation grounds are not cut? Is that what you want? No, obviously not. So we are solving a problem. If there are consequential effects, we will deal with that as we go along. I can't tell you whether property owners will pass on the property tax to tenants. I don't know. But I can tell you I looked at the valuation roll, and I looked, for example, at properties that might have rental values of $10,000 a month, which is quite up at the upper end of the system. And I saw that the tax might be $200, $250 a month. And I thought to myself, if you're generating revenue of $10,000 a month and you now have to pay a tax of $200 a month, as Dr. Ramkissoon has said, you're in a competitive system. So do you add $200 to your rent and then become uncompetitive and you lose your tenant and that's it, you have no revenue? Or do you absorb that and you keep your tenants? So I can't speak for the business community, but it's all about competition and a competitive environment. So I don't think there would be an immediate pass-through, because dealing with real estate, the market is a bit soft, and I think if people just jack up rents, they would lose their tenants, and therefore they may have to absorb it. So that's my take on it, but I can't speak for the business community in that respect.
Okay. Thank you very much, Minister. Your question was about trade missions. So far, the TTMA has been on 4 trade missions. The first one was to Grenada. That trade mission was in January. Second trade mission was to the Dominican Republic. Third trade mission, we went to Suriname, and we just came back in August. We went to St. Lucia, and right now, as we speak, we have over 45 individuals representing over 35 businesses currently in Guyana. In fact, Dr. Ramdeen and I, we have to catch a flight at 9:30 to go and meet the rest of the delegation who are already engaging in business in Guyana. And simply because our intelligence sources got it wrong, we thought that the minister would have read the budget on the 9th.
Like the millennium tax.
Right. So we planned a trade mission to come back in time for the budget, but it ended up the other way around. So let me just explain to you what has happened. We do these trade missions in collaboration with the Ministry of Trade and Industry through its executing agency, Export TT, and the Ministry of Finance through one of its executing agencies, Exim Bank. And we are able to take a very deliberate mix of small, medium, and large businesses on these missions. And the fact that we can have successful missions back to back, businesses don't spend money willy-nilly. It means that when these businesses are going overseas, they are in fact bringing back orders. And just to put a plug here, our President's dinner is on the 14th of November. And at that point, I will make some of the results of those missions known. So anybody who has not gotten tickets, if you want to find out about that, now is the time. But we have businesses. When we went to the trade and investment, we did our trade and investment convention in July. And while we were walking through the convention, I saw businesses that have never exported before with flags on their walls saying that I now export to 2 countries, I now export to 3 countries, I now export to 4 countries, 5 countries. So since last year, when the economies were open back, after COVID, we started doing physical trade missions, and those missions are in fact bearing fruit. And I am testimony to that, because in my own business, our exports now, directly as a result of trade missions, now trump the exports we were getting before we went on those trade missions. So we will make those results known. We wanted to get Guyana out of the way, and then we definitely see a lot of results. Because let me tell you this, there are about 80% of the companies, right, who have repeated. When we have our trade missions, they come back. And then we have about a 20% rate. Every time we do a mission, we get about 20% are new entrants into the trade missions. And in fact, let me talk about investments overseas, because I think that was mentioned. On this particular trade mission to Guyana, we will be in fact visiting companies who have direct investments in Guyana. We'll be visiting Camry Glass, we're visiting the Cosals Group, we're visiting Rams Logistics, we'll be visiting Antimacar's facilities, among other businesses, to actually get a first-hand sight, and on-the-ground knowledge to see what is going on there and to see what assistance we, as the body that represents them, can add to make sure that they continue to grow in a high-performance market now, like Guyana. Is there any other questions from the floor? Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Doris Polo from CNC3. So my first question, might be my only one, is about the business community's perspective on what Minister Imbert spoke about regarding the increase in the retirement age from 60 to 65. And I would also like to get from you, Dr. Ramkissoon, whether you are of the mind that this is a suitable solution to closing the gap caused by the aging population.
Thank you very much. Let me invite Dr. Ramkissoon to speak on it.
I thought she asked the minister
Oh,
first.
she asked the minister?
Yeah, I
I thought I heard Dr. Ramkissoon, so you're giving way to the minister.
I think he's well qualified to talk about that.
The simple thing, my view is that yes, it is to increase the age. That is one way of dealing with the challenges that is faced by the National Insurance Fund. Europe is doing it, other countries are doing it. You see, I want to link it back though to when to the point I made earlier, that it has always been easy to increase the allowances for all kinds of reasons, some good, but we did not spend enough time thinking about we are living on a depleting asset, and that prices and production fluctuates, as the Minister of Finance has pointed out so many times, and that one day we would have been talking about mature fields and so on. So it is like these things are catching up with us, and we have to find ways to adjust. We have to communicate in a positive and proper way with the population. I think that is extremely important. We cannot just simply say, well, you guys responsible and we're just passing on these costs. We have to learn to communicate properly with the population in respect of what is happening. In many cases, it's not their fault. They might have enjoyed the benefits over the last 60 years, whatever, but it is what we have to do. Yes? So that's my...
With respect to the retirement age, we have some pushback from some of the trade unions, and we have other trade unions demanding that we do it. I'll give you an example. The National Union of Government and Federated Workers is demanding that we increase the retirement age to 65. the Public Service Association is demanding that we don't increase it. The fact of the matter is we're all living longer. There's no two ways about it. And people are productive way beyond the age of 60. And I always have a difficulty because if you are earning a salary, it's always going to be more than your pension. In some cases, your pension might be very small. Some people don't even have a pension. And therefore, why would you want to give up an extra 5 years of earning capacity? That's the part that beats me when I hear people pushing back at don't increase the retirement age to 65. Because what you're in effect saying is I don't want that additional 5 years of earning capacity. I will make do with either no pension at all or a small pension. In other words, their standard of living will go down immediately, and I don't understand the argument. So I am all for increasing the retirement age to 65. The rest of the Caribbean has done it already. If you go to Barbados, I think it's 66. Jamaica, I think, is 65. Some other countries, 67, and so on. There's absolutely no reason why we should have this artificial mandatory requirement. That is something, it's probably like the withholding tax. That is something that was a good idea in 1950. It was a good idea. Perhaps in those days, when you get to age 60, you become less productive, and it was a good idea to retire people at that age, but it is no longer so.
Yeah.
So that we as a government are going to continue to promote this. There is a majority view from the people we have consulted with that it is a good idea, and it does significantly deal with the problem we have with the National Insurance Fund in terms of the benefits, because there are more and more people coming on to the National Insurance Benefit scheme in terms of being in receipt of a national insurance pension than there are people coming in at the bottom in terms of making contributions from their 20s, and so they make 40 years of contributions or 30 years of contributions. There are less and less people coming in at the bottom of the system to make those many years of contributions, and there are more and more people graduating out of the system to receive a pension, and it has to be dealt with, and virtually every other country in the world has dealt with it, and if we just avoid it, I go back to something Dr. Ramkissoon is saying. There are things we need to do. We've put them off for so long. Communication is key. I watched a post-budget panel discussion last night very briefly, and people were discussing various things. What should we do about the price of water? What should we do about the price of electricity? And so on. And one of the panelists made the point, we have become accustomed to this, and therefore it's not going to be easy to make the change, and therefore it has to be done in a particular way. There has to be proper communication. People need to understand what is going on before they could accept the adjustment. But from the government side, we do believe it's necessary and it's beneficial to increase the retirement age.
Yeah, just quickly, just to support the points being made, interestingly enough, we did a talent survey about a week ago across the region, and I was surprised to find that Trinidad and Tobago, out of the 8 territories that we operate in, is the only one with the retirement age at 60. Most of them are above that. Yeah. Closer to 65 would be the average. So it's like that throughout, at least in our experience.
So the question asks about the opinion of the business community, and we ask ourselves, if you have an educated, skilled, talented, able-bodied individual working in your organization, would you want that person to retire at 60 simply because there's some regulatory requirement to do so? And in most cases, the answer is no. You want to retain skilled, talented, able-bodied individuals who can continue to contribute to the growth and development of your organization. The other point I want to make, though, is that part of the revenue issue, we hope, will be addressed with the implementation of the TTRA, because one of the issues is the net the net is not wide enough in terms of NIS contributions like tax collections. You have a number of businesses who are not making those NIS contributions on behalf of their employees. They've fallen below the radar. And if the net is widened and you get contributions from more businesses, more individuals, then that can help to plug the gap currently.
Let me come in here. There's an interesting statistic that I discovered some years ago. Our labor force is approximately 600,000. It goes up and down around that number. But the number of persons on the national insurance scheme is 400,000. So where are those 200,000 people? It's something that we have to deal with. So,
Mr. Roach, I think it's important to also say that people have a choice. You don't have to work until you reach age 65, especially, and this is especially important for younger people who, for whatever reason, may not wish to work beyond 60 for whatever reason. But what it says is there are certain things they must do earlier in their lives in terms of saving for retirement. And there's nothing wrong if they decide to open a business, do investments, and live the kind of life they would like to live at age 60. So I think people must also be pointed out that this is not something that they have to do, but that they have options. They have choices to make. Start making it when you are young.
correct.
Thank you very much.
So another question. Minister, it's about foreign exchange. And I know you would have mentioned earlier that you would have been intending to speak with the banking sector so that businesses that have access to the state's Forex can be required in some form to reinvest here so that it's circulated in our economy. But when we have the demand for foreign exchange outweighing the supply, are there any other means that you're looking at to address that mismatch?
Just let me correct something that you said. The discussions about repatriating foreign exchange relate to the Exim Bank.
Right.
It's a requirement. So that if we are going to give you Forex, the government's Forex, through the Exim Bank, then it's a requirement that we expect you to repatriate some of it. We can't tell the commercial banks that whoever they give foreign exchange to, they must link that to repatriation. That is not our remit. That's out of order. We can't do that. So I just want to correct that. It is in terms of a government institution that has a Forex window for exporters who are earning foreign exchange, that if you want to get Forex from the Exim Bank, we expect that you will repatriate some of your earnings back. It's a condition. So I just want to clear that up. It's not the government going and telling Republic Bank or Royal Bank, when you give somebody foreign exchange, they must repatriate whatever. I just want to clear that up because I was getting a signal from you that I wasn't too comfortable with. With respect to Forex itself, it's complex. As I said, we are defending the exchange rate. If we do that, we know there's going to be pressures. So that's why I'm having the discussions with the banks and the business organizations to see what we can do to ease the pressure. Okay? And we're still in the discussion phase at this point in time.
All right, thank you.
Do we have any questions? I'm seeing someone by the mic in front of me.
Yes, good afternoon all. Renee Lisa Phillip, representing the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Trinidad and Tobago. We have a question on the scanners. We expect that the scanners would be used to detect illegal items. The question is, what is there in place to detect things like brass nuggets coming in as gold or gold nuggets coming in as brass, which actually can affect capital flight because it is an issue concerning money laundering? Thank you.
I don't think the scanners are designed to do that. I think if we had to procure scanners that could detect the type of metal that is coming in, they wouldn't cost 90 million, they might cost 900 million. what the scanners do is give you a visual image. So you're seeing through the wall of the container, you're seeing into the container. It's just like the scanners at the airport. I'm sure you've seen that the security officer is looking at what's in your luggage, and he can see what's in there and see there's not a knife or some dangerous object inside of there. That's what the scanner does. So it gives you a picture of what's inside the container, whether it's a gun or whether there's a huge package that looks suspicious and so on. But a scanner would not, at least not the scanners we are buying, would not be able to tell you whether that is gold or that is brass or that is steel. Okay?
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we want to wrap up in about 10 minutes or so. So if anybody has any closing questions, feel free to approach the microphone at this time. I have a question that came through online, which says, Minister, in the last budget or the budget before, reading, you spoke about a policy to reduce tax or corporation tax by about 5% for significant exporters of local goods. Thus far, this measure has not been implemented. Can you advise? And I want to add, you did propose a measure to alleviate some taxation for businesses that attract the 30% tax rate. Is this new measure a replacement to the measure you mentioned before, or can you give some clarity on it?
Sure. The 30% tax rate just refers to your typical business. Because as you may know, a bank is taxed at 35%, a petrochemical company is taxed at 35%, and an oil company is taxed at 55%. So the reference to the 30% tax rate is simply to identify that this is an ordinary business, let's call it that. And what we're doing is that we are exempting exporters from business levy. Because you know how the business levy works. If you don't declare a profit, you pay the levy. So in this case, if you have a company exporting, we assume there'll be other beneficial consequences from that. So we would waive the business levy in that case. It is not intended to replace the other taxation measure. That is something we will have to discuss with the TTMA because these things need to be tightened. What is a significant exporter, for example? Okay, so I can give you the assurance we will meet with the TTMA very soon to discuss how we define the conditions that would allow a significant exporter to benefit from that reduction in the corporation tax rate. Because again, it deals with what Dr. Ramkissoon said. He made a very important point. If your economy is growing because you're consuming, because you're just importing foreign goods, so you're just spending more, so you're having growth, it's going to destroy your foreign exchange reserves. And that's not what we want. We don't want more importers, we want more exporters. And that's what that measure is all about. If you're exporting and you're either not consuming foreign exchange or you're earning it, because both of those are beneficial, either you do consume or you earn, then we want to give you an incentive, which is what the tax reduction is all about. Okay, so I will meet with the TTMA to see if we could flesh that out and tie it down.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarity, Minister. So George, you wanted to weigh in?
Just wanted to add that we mentioned the special economic zone regime. So when that is enacted, as part of the sectors being supported, manufacturing is there, and it would depend on the level of investment, the level of employment. You may be able to qualify under that regime. You may have to be in a designated zone or a special zone, if a single zone, if you make the requisite investment. And in those circumstances, although the minister hasn't landed on a tax rate, there may be concessionary tax rates.
What we're looking at there, you have the attempt to push the global minimum tax of 15%. But as the Minister of Trade will tell you, that is really aimed at very large businesses that have a certain profile in terms of their revenue and so on. It isn't, that 15% isn't targeted at small businesses or medium businesses, and the minister has in fact recommended 10%. And I think we have sorted that out in terms of, is that going to get us into trouble with these global forum and EU people? Because they're not easy.
No,
if you have this global tax rate of 15% and we establish a special economic zone with a 10%, next thing you know, well, you're on the EU radar again. But I think we've sorted it out.
Yeah.
Okay?
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there being no further questions, I would just like to thank the Honourable Minister of Finance for gracing us with his presence and staying for the entire evening. I must say I was quite impressed with the conversation and the panel discussion at this particular budget, post-budget discussion. It was a lot more refreshing than some of the other panels I was able to witness yesterday.
That's so.
Right? I want to thank Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon. Thank you for answering my call and agreeing to be on this panel. And obviously, Mr. Wade George, who's no stranger to panels, but thank you for coming back to the best panel. Ladies and gentlemen, as we bring the evening to a close, it is with a deep sense of gratitude and appreciation that we really and truly enjoyed your presence here today. I want to thank every one of you for showing up personally. I would also like to thank our audience who are viewing online and has been a part of these insightful discussions. Let me thank our sponsors, Exim Bank, First Citizens, Ansa McCall, and EY for agreeing to sponsor this auspicious event. We will be contacting you again in 2024 to continue our partnership with these insightful discussions. And I know it's 4 p.m. and we said we'll end at 4 p.m. So I just want to invite the panel to remain on the stage so that we can make some presentations. Okay, I now invite the panelists can now exit the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, oh, you want a picture? Can the panelists, all the panelists remain on stage with me? And for the government ministers who are still here, could you also join us right after the panelists?